The universe, in its infinite complexity, had developed a rather convenient sorting system for sentient species, not through any divine intervention or cosmic bureaucracy, but through the simple, brutal mathematics of survival. Every spacefaring civilization eventually encountered the same fundamental question: which species could erase you from existence, and which could barely erase a stain from their own clothing? The answer determined everything from trade agreements to territorial disputes, to whether you bothered saying hello or just opened fire. At the top of this lovely hierarchy sat the apex species, the ones whose warships could crack planets like eggs, and whose diplomatic greeting translated roughly to obey or become stellar dust. Below them sprawled hundreds of mid-tier civilizations, all desperately trying to climb higher while stepping on anyone beneath them. And at the bottom, well, at the bottom you found the Class 7 entities. Harmless. Ignorable. The galactic equivalent of decorative moss. Humanity had been definitively categorized as Class 7 approximately 43 standard cycles ago, following a comprehensive review by the Interspecies Threat Assessment Collective. The reasoning was airtight. Humans possessed slower-than-light vessels held together with what appeared to be optimism and spare parts, no significant military presence beyond their own star system, and a bizarre tendency to name their ships things like Bessie or the struggling budget. Their biological specifications suggested a prey species from a death world, but their technological development indicated they had somehow stumbled into space travel while still figuring out basic metallurgy. The ITAC had filed humanity under quaint monitor for anthropological interest only and moved on to more pressing matters. This classification would have continued indefinitely, comfortable and unchallenged, had Commander Zrell'nak of the Vex'thorian Empire not decided to enforce a blockade in the Kepler 442 disputed zone on the 7th rotation of the 3rd cycle of 2152, Earth Standard Time. The Vex'thorians occupied a prestigious position near the apex of galactic society, which they had earned through the traditional method of being absolutely terrifying. They stood 9 feet tall on legs that resembled industrial hydraulics, possessed 4 arms that could each bench press a small vehicle, and featured faces that looked like someone had tried to make a nightmare and overachieved. Their eyes glowed with bioluminescent intensity, their scales could deflect small arms fire, and their vocal cords produced sounds that made most species' threat centers light up like festival decorations. More importantly, the Vex'thorians had never lost a military engagement. Not once in 4,000 years of interstellar conquest. Their tactical doctrine was simple: appear, announce demands, watch smaller species comply immediately. On the rare occasion someone felt suicidal enough to resist, the Vex'thorians would demonstrate exactly why their warships carried names like Crimson Judgment and Inevitable Conclusion. Commander Zrell'nak commanded one such vessel, and he was exceptionally good at his job. His career statistics included 847 successful interdictions, 23 major battle victories, and exactly 0 incidents where anyone had failed to immediately surrender upon seeing his ship's weapon systems activate. He wore his service scars with pride, maintained his scales with military precision, and had never once questioned whether appearing terrifying was really the most efficient approach to diplomacy. Today's assignment was barely worth calling an assignment. Some human cargo vessel had wandered into disputed space, probably by accident given humanity's infamous navigation systems. The Kepler 442 zone was currently under Vex'thorian claim, pending resolution of a tedious border dispute with the Kelrathi Confederacy. Any vessel entering the zone without authorization would be detained, its crew interrogated, and its cargo confiscated. Standard procedure, barely worth waking up for. The crimson judgment dropped out of faster-than-light travel with the subtle grace of a falling anvil, its massive form materializing like a bad dream in front of the human vessel. Zrell'nak's tactical display showed the target clearly, a cargo hauler roughly the size of a small apartment building, moving at speeds that suggested its engine was perhaps thinking about accelerating if it felt like it. The hull appeared to be constructed from approximately 70% metal and 30% prayers. The name stenciled on its side read Dandelion Express. Zrell'nak's secondary left hand rubbed his temple ridge. Of course it did. His weapons officer, a younger Vex'thorian named Krell who still possessed some enthusiasm for routine work, activated the targeting arrays. 47 plasma cannons locked onto the human ship's drive section with mechanical precision. Missile bays opened with a satisfying hiss. Energy shields flared to full combat strength, bathing the crimson judgment in a menacing crimson glow that had inspired its name. Standard protocol demanded a warning message first, though it was really more of a formality. Most species saw the weapons lock and immediately shut down their systems before the message finished transmitting. The communication channel opened, and Zrell'nak prepared his standard speech about territorial sovereignty and the consequences of trespass. But first, visual contact. Always important to let them see what they were dealing with. The view screen flickered to life, and Zrell'nak found himself looking at a human male, perhaps 30 standard years old, sitting in what appeared to be a pilot's chair held together with actual tape. The human wore a stained jumpsuit, had 3 days of facial hair growth, and was holding a beverage container that proclaimed Galaxy's okayest pilot in garish lettering. Their eyes met across the void of space. The human glanced at something off-screen, presumably his own tactical display showing the 47 locked weapons. His eyebrows rose slightly. He looked back at Zrell'nak, and then the human smiled, not a diplomatic smile, not a nervous smile. A genuine, delighted smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face into an expression of what could only be described as mischievous joy. Zrell'nak felt something he had not experienced in 17 years of military service: confusion. His threat assessment systems, sophisticated pieces of technology that analyzed everything from body temperature to chemical signatures, immediately began screaming contradictory data. The human's heart rate had increased, yes, but not into panic territory, more like excitement. His adrenaline levels were elevated, but coupling with dopamine rather than cortisol. His muscle tension suggested readiness, but not for flight. The biological readings indicated the human was experiencing the biochemical state associated with fun. "Well, hello there," the human said, his voice carrying the easy casualness of someone greeting a neighbor, not a warship. "That is quite the weapons array you have got pointed at my humble vessel. Very impressive. Did all 47 really need to lock on, or are some of them just for show? No judgment, I appreciate thoroughness." Zrell'nak's translator worked overtime, but the words made sense. What did not make sense was the tone. Where was the fear? The immediate surrender? The standard biological panic response that every species exhibited when facing imminent obliteration? "You are in violation of Vex'thorian territorial claims," Zrell'nak began, his rehearsed speech feeling suddenly inadequate. "You will power down your vessel and prepare for boarding." "Ah, see, here is the thing about that," the human said, leaning back in his chair with apparent comfort. "I have got a delivery contract for Kepler 442b, and the paperwork specifically says this route is designated neutral space pending arbitration. Now I am not saying you are wrong, because you clearly have more guns than me, and that is its own kind of correctness, but I am saying there might be a paperwork discrepancy worth discussing." He was negotiating, while smiling, while 47 plasma cannons were locked onto his ship. Krell leaned toward Zrell'nak, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Commander, should I fire a warning shot?" "No," Zrell'nak said slowly, unable to look away from the human. "Hold position." Something was wrong. Not with the ship or the situation, but with the human's complete lack of appropriate terror. In Zrell'nak's extensive experience, prey species exhibited one of three responses to overwhelming force: immediate surrender, panic, or occasionally a suicidal attack, born of desperation. This casual discussion of paperwork, while grinning like an idiot, fit none of those categories. "Tell me, human," Zrell'nak said, his tactical mind racing. "Do you not understand your situation?" "Oh, I understand it completely," the human replied cheerfully. "You have got a giant warship, I have got a cargo hauler that sometimes makes concerning noises when I turn left, and we are having a conversation about jurisdiction. I understand situations like this perfectly. Question is, do you understand yours? I have 47 weapons locked onto your vessel." "Yes, you mentioned that. Very threatening. Solid opening move. But here is the thing nobody ever seems to consider in these scenarios." The human leaned forward, his smile growing wider. "What happens if you fire?" "You die," Zrell'nak said flatly. "Sure, probably. But then what? You have vaporized a human cargo ship in disputed space. And humans, we are weird about that sort of thing. We get emotional, we hold grudges. We have this bizarre cultural tendency to respond disproportionately when we are annoyed." The human took a sip from his beverage container. "Plus, and I cannot stress this enough, you would have to file so much paperwork about this. Incident reports, cargo manifests, diplomatic inquiries. Have you ever dealt with human bureaucracy? It makes Vogon poetry look efficient." Zrell'nak's secondary right hand moved unconsciously toward his own terminal. The human was bluffing. Obviously, humans were Class 7. They had no military capacity to threaten the Vex'thorian Empire. Their bureaucracy was irrelevant. And yet, the smile, that cursed smile. Besides, the human continued, clearly enjoying himself now. "I have been monitoring your fleet movements. Nice blockade pattern, by the way, very textbook. But I noticed you have got 6 other ships holding the perimeter, and 3 of them are Kelruthi Confederacy vessels pretending they are not watching this exact conversation right now. If you blow me up, that is going to create an incident. And incidents require diplomatic solutions, and diplomatic solutions require meetings, and meetings require..." He paused dramatically. "More paperwork." Zrell'nak checked his tactical display. The human was correct. 3 Kelruthi vessels were indeed holding position at the system's edge, monitoring everything. Witnesses. "You are attempting to manipulate me with threats of administrative inconvenience," Zrell'nak said slowly. "I am attempting to save us both a tremendous headache," the human corrected. "Look, I have got 17 tons of agricultural supplies that some colonists need to not starve. You have got a territorial claim to enforce. These are not incompatible goals. I go through, deliver my cargo, you maintain your blockade for everyone else. Nobody files paperwork about destroyed civilian vessels, and we all go home happy. Well, you go home to your giant scary warship. I go home to my apartment that smells weird and I cannot figure out why." The bridge of the Crimson Judgment had gone completely silent. Zrell'nak's crew stared at the view screen with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror. One junior officer had begun running additional biological scans on the human, clearly convinced this must be some kind of sophisticated alien species disguised as a harmless Class 7. "Commander," his tactical officer said quietly, "the human's vessel is not powering down. In fact, his engines just kicked into higher output." The Dandelion Express, that ridiculous excuse for a spacecraft, was indeed beginning to maneuver. Not fleeing, not attacking, just adjusting its trajectory slightly, as if preparing to go around the Crimson Judgment if this conversation did not conclude favorably. The audacity was staggering. "You cannot be serious," Zrell'nak said. "You believe you can simply fly past my warship." "I believe," the human said, his smile never wavering, "that you are a military professional who understands cost-benefit analysis. Destroying me costs you time, resources, diplomatic capital, and creates complications with the Kelrathi, who are definitely recording this. Letting me pass costs you nothing except maybe some pride, and honestly, I am just one ship. How much damage does that really do to your blockade's effectiveness?" He was doing it again, making logical arguments while maintaining that insufferable smile. Zrell'nak had commanded warships for 23 years. He had faced down pirates, rebels, and desperate military forces. He had never, not once, encountered someone who responded to overwhelming firepower with cheerful negotiation tactics and grins that suggested they were somehow in control of the situation. "Commander," Krell said urgently. "Orders." Every tactical instinct Zrell'nak possessed screamed at him to fire, to demonstrate that Vex'thorian authority was not subject to debate or manipulation, to remind the galaxy why his species occupied the apex. But another instinct, deeper and older, whispered something else. An instinct that had kept his ancestors alive on their homeworld before they reached for the stars. The instinct that recognized when prey behavior did not match prey biology. The human was not afraid because the human did not think he was in danger. And perhaps, horrifyingly, he was correct. Not because of military might or defensive capabilities, but because he had correctly calculated that Zrell'nak, as a rational commander, would choose the path of least resistance. Destroying the human created problems. Ignoring the human created none. The weaponization of administrative annoyance. "Stand down, weapons," Zrell'nak heard himself say. The bridge erupted in shocked silence, somehow louder than any protest. "Sir," Krell's voice cracked slightly, "the human is correct about the Kelrathi witnesses and the disputed territory status," Zrell'nak said, his voice steady despite internal turmoil. "Destroying a civilian vessel carrying agricultural supplies would create unnecessary diplomatic complications. He may pass." On the view screen, the human's smile somehow grew even wider. "Commander, you are a gentleman and a scholar. If I ever make it back to Earth, first round is on me, provided you fit in the bar. Leave. Now. Before I reconsider. Already gone. Already gone." The human offered a casual salute that probably violated 17 different military protocols. "Safe travels, Commander. And seriously, consider consolidating some of those weapons locks. 47 is overkill for one cargo hauler. 30 would have made your point just fine." The communication channel closed, and the Dandelion Express, that absurd little ship, fired its engines and simply flew past the Crimson Judgment, past the most feared warship in 3 sectors, past 47 armed weapons systems, and it was still making concerning noises when it turned left. Zrell'nak watched it go, aware that his crew was staring at him with expressions that suggested they were witnessing the end of an era. Perhaps they were. In the following hours, the story spread, not through official military channels, but through the informal networks that connected every species in the galaxy. A human cargo hauler had faced down a Vex'thorian warship and simply smiled, and the warship had blinked. The Kelrathi vessels departed the system shortly after, and Zrell'nak knew their reports would reach their government within days. Other species would hear, other ships would wonder. If a human could negotiate his way past a Vex'thorian blockade with nothing but logic and an inexplicable grin, what did that say about the famous Vex'thorian intimidation doctrine? 3 weeks later, the Interspecies Threat Assessment Collective would quietly update humanity's classification. Not to apex predator status, not even to mid-tier, but to a newly created category, Class 7A. Harmless unless engaged, highly unpredictable, exercise caution. The notation in the file read simply, recommend avoiding direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary. Species demonstrates abnormal psychological responses to threat situations. Further study required. Commander Zrell'nak would go on to have a distinguished career, but he never forgot the human pilot who smiled at a warship. Sometimes, late at night, he would wonder if humanity had been misclassified from the beginning. Not because they were secretly powerful or militarily threatening, but because they operated on a completely different threat assessment matrix than the rest of the galaxy. Most species saw weapons and calculated survival odds. Humans apparently saw weapons and calculated paperwork volume. The universe, it turned out, had failed to account for one variable in its convenient sorting system: what happens when a species is too stubborn, too optimistic, or too administratively burdensome to properly intimidate. The answer was currently delivering agricultural supplies to Kepler 442b and probably still making concerning noises when turning left.